I know that you have a long history of work in Costa Rica, starting with the time you were a graduate student, I guess, right?
It started when I was a graduate student.
So say a little bit about those days, what brought you down here, how you figured out what you were going to do.
Well, Julie, when I graduated from college, I knew I wanted to be a tropical botanist. There's no question in my mind. And fortunately, I met Don Stone before I even applied to graduate school. And when I met Don, I knew I also wanted to work with him at Duke. So after I graduated from college, I took my first trip to the tropics to Colombia with Richard Evans Schultes and got a real taste of what it was going to be like.
Amazing.
Yeah. My first trip to Bogota with him. And that also was very encouraging to try to pursue this sort of field. So after that trip to Bogota with Richard Evans Schultes, I knew I wanted to work with Don. I knew I wanted to work in the tropics. And of course, Don Stone was very connected with OTS and Costa Rica at that point. So I picked a group of plants, heliconias, jumped in the van at Duke and drove all the way to Costa Rica.
Oh, you did?
Yes, the first time, 1977. At that point, the Sandinistas were in Nicaragua. There's a little unrest in El Salvador, so it was quite a trip. But I got here, and I remember driving down to Puerto Viejo, taking the boat to La Selva the first time, which was quite exciting. And then came back in '78 and took the Fundamentals of Ecology course with Gary Hartshorn.
So you drove to Costa Rica from Duke in '78. And how did you decide to work at Las Cruces?
Well, because I was working on heliconia for my dissertation, both the systematics and plant-animal interactions, I knew that Las Cruces had a very good collection of cultivated heliconias. And so I went down there, met Bob Wilson, who started Las Cruces and was running the botanic garden. And I saw the opportunities there to do exactly the sorts of studies I wanted to do, which were crossing studies and breeding studies to kind of figure out something about what barriers were preventing species hybridization and things. So after taking the fundamentals course, I came back, brought all my equipment, and spent the next year and a half living at Las Cruces, doing all these experiments and really getting to know the place.
And what was that like?
It's quite different than it is today, I'll tell you that. Bob's house was there. There was already the field station had been developed. I occupied a little apartment under the field station, a one-room apartment there. But the collections were already moving forward, the plant collections. And there were a lot of heliconias, a lot of Marantaceae, a lot of Zingiberales, beautiful palm collection that Bob had started. And he was receiving material from all over the world at that point, from collectors that knew he was trying to get this garden going. So it was kind of exciting to be not only there doing my own research, but seeing the garden develop.
So he was expanding the garden and expanding the plantings while you were...
Bob would grow everything that was sent to him. I remember driving to San Jose once with Bob, and he stopped about every 20 kilometers to pick some plant off the side of the road between San Jose and San Vito. He was an excellent plantsman.
What was his background and what...
Bob and his wife Catherine ran a nursery in Miami called Fantastic Gardens. And I'd never visited that nursery, but I knew that it was just chock full of all different types of plants. But I think financially it wasn't doing so well, so Bob decided to move to Costa Rica, I believe to start a tea plantation of all things, not a botanic garden. But he realized that tea was not appropriate for the Las Cruces area. And so he was inspired by a number of people to actually go back into the plant diversity business and start this botanic garden, Las Cruces.
And why the San Vito area? Do you know why he's...
I'm not quite sure why he picked San Vito. It couldn't have been further away from everything else in Costa Rica. Maybe that's why. Bob was not a particularly people person. In fact, it was about the opposite, if anything. But they found this property in San Vito, and when they decided to go for a botanic garden, I don't remember all the details, but they went big time with some support from, I think, the Stanley Smith Foundation, Stanley Smith himself. They brought in Roberto Burley Marx, who was one of the foremost landscape architects and garden designers in all of South America and Brazil, who designed parks and things in Rio de Janeiro, and he's the one that built that whole garden swirling down the mountainside or the hillside from Bob's house, and put all those big bromeliads, those beautiful big vreges and things. That was kind of a signature Burle Marx sort of thing. So a lot of people don't understand that this is not just a botanic garden, but it's a premier botanic garden. For Costa Rica, there's no other garden like it.
Expand a little bit on that and the role of that botanical garden now.
Well,
and historically.
Historically, it had a great start with design by Roberto Burle Marx, with Bob Wilson being such a plant person and knowing so much about plant diversity. A lot of people contributing plants to the garden. But I think the same reason that Fantastic Gardens may not have succeeded was why Bob then ran into some financial problems with his botanic garden in southern Costa Rica. I mean, it was as far away from any population center as it could be. And so that's when the relationship developed with OTS and Las Cruces Botanic Garden in terms of, could OTS take advantage of this beautiful cloud forestation with this educational facility, the Botanic Garden, and expand its own mission there.
Were you at Las Cruces when those negotiations were taking place?
I wasn't there during that year and a half I lived there, but while I was working at Las Cruces over my doctoral dissertation, I kind of watched it all happen, and Don was involved in that. And I think, to be perfectly straightforward, Bob didn't have much choice, but he also knew OTS kind of bailed him out in some way and felt a little, I don't want to say resentful, but it was his creation. And I would spend, since there was nobody at the station except Bob and his wife Catherine and me, I spent almost every evening, Bob would come down while I'm trying to look in the microscope and do take all my notes and and he would just, bend my ear for an hour or 2 hours at a time. Are you saying stop? Oh, I thought you mentioned. So we had great conversations about everything, mostly about plants. And things would come up, and he'd know things and teach me, and I'd say, oh, I'd seen this on the trail or that. And I learned a lot from Bob Wilson, to say the least. But the one who really ran things was Catherine. She was a very severe woman in her own right.
Was she handled the financial side of it?
I think they maybe both did that together. But I remember they had this Land Rover, this old beat-up Land Rover, and when Catherine would get behind, she was a small woman, get behind the wheel of that and zip off to San Vito. The road was terrible then. It was a gravel road, nothing like it is today. And the town people in San Vito were terrified of Catherine. They'd run out of the way when she came driving down the street. So they were an interesting couple, to say the least.
It must have been quite a challenge to get food in, because San Vito was not very large.
No, it wasn't. But there was enough kind of farms around, and I got to know the town pretty well. And while I was living there, my wife, who was my girlfriend at that point, she came down. She was a medical student. So she worked in the clinic in San Vito for 3 months. So we kind of got to know the town people that way, because she was helping them in public health things, and I'd go down. So we became kind of a part of the community, which was very nice at that point. So I got to know that area quite well over that period of time. But Bob, I mean, again, he was not a person who really liked to be around people, but he loved to be around plants, and he knew exactly how to grow things and where to put them in the garden. And so you walk around today and you look at like that big line of pigophetia palms that go out to the lookout. I mean, it's a beautiful setting. And of course, the garden is now 30 years older than it was when I was there. And it needs a little bit more kind of horticultural emphasis on it if it's going to kind of maintain that history of being a premier botanic garden in Central America.
And where does the garden fit in now in the world of botanical gardens? Is it?
It doesn't really fit in the world of botanical gardens. It's more into the world of field stations, of biological field stations. When I look at Las Cruces, I see it fitting exactly the mission of OTS in terms of research now. And the research that's going on there, because it's a little postage stamp in the sea of ever-changing, fragmented forest, the idea of focusing on restoration ecology and such things at Las Cruces is perfect. So it fits the research question, it fits education, both in terms of public education, with even people from San Vito, and just like La Selva with all the birders and the ecotourists coming. Also with courses being there is very important, and with conservation. I mean, here we're preserving La Selva as, again, an oasis of plant diversity and animal diversity and microorganism diversity in a sea of changing habitats. Las Cruces, with all the species that were planted there, is really a conservation haven as well, and I'm not quite sure if that's appreciated as much as it should be appreciated. Not that anything, well, I can't say. There may be some things there that are known from nowhere else that were planted there, and now natural populations have declined. But just in terms of accessing this diversity, many of it from outside of the Costa Rica region, many of it from Costa Rica, it really needs to be inventoried and it needs to be taken care of.
I remember reading that after Hurricane Andrew struck Miami and did such damage at Fairchild Garden, and then also the hurricane that hit Hawaii in the same year and damaged the tropical botanical gardens there, that it left Las Cruces with one of the major collections of palms. Do I remember correctly?
Palms and Zingiberales, which
and
you know is my specialty. And I planted a lot of the Zingiberales at Las Cruces that I brought from around the country, not from outside. Mm-hmm. Well, there's some things I brought from Panama and mm-hmm. Nicaragua, but Central American things. But between palms and Las Cruces, I think, has the second or third largest palm collection in the world. A lot of it duplicated at Fairchild. A lot of the Zingiberales duplicated in Hawaii at National Tropical Botanical Garden and Lion Arboretum. It is a rich germplasm resource. And those plants don't always take care of themselves. They have to be maintained a bit. So I would really like to see that develop at Las Cruces if we can do that.
Right. The prime movers of the relationship between OTS and Las Cruces was Mildred Mathias and her interest in botanical gardens.
Yes.
So did you overlap with her?
Yes, I knew her. I did not know Mildred very well. I did see her at Las Cruces, and I did see her, I may have met her at La Selva as well. But she was kind of a counterpart to Bob Wilson, but instead of being a horticulturist, she was a botanist really interested in plant diversity and a lover of plants. So I think she played an important role in advising Bob on things that he should get for the garden. She loved the garden as well. And as a kind of a founder of OTS and ATBC, I think her input was very important. From the beginning, both ATBC and OTS have been kind of focused on tropical ecology. A few of us, including Don Stone, which are more focused on taxonomy and plant systematics and evolution, Mildred fed into that mold more than an ecologist. And I think the small cohort within OTS really appreciated that biodiversity aspect of it in terms of just, the spectrum of plant life. And Las Cruces really represents that very much.
I remember a comment that Don made in his history of OTS about the role of plant systematists in both the founding of OTS and the founding of ATB, that they were very well represented, perhaps more than one might expect.
Exactly. And then things kind of, because we had this beautiful forest like at La Selva, the study of the interactions and forest function and everything became more of a focus of both ATBC and OTS. But at the very beginning there were a lot of, not just plant systematists, but also zoological taxonomists as well.
And you were at Duke at the time that the flora of La Selva was underway?
Yes. Well, let me go back and just say, I was in my second semester as a student with Don when he decided to take over as executive director of OTS. I thought my career had ended. It obviously didn't, and what Don taught me, besides basic plant systematics and evolution, was how to manage an organization as complex as OTS, and showed what devotion is really about, and he certainly did that. So I learned a lot about writing NSF proposals.
And I think about service beyond your personal research.
Exactly.
And your personal teaching, involvement at that kind of a more global
Very much
level.
so. Very much.
Yeah.
So I feel lucky that I've kind of followed from that very early start the evolution of OTS and saw what dedication could do. And maybe that's why I'm so involved in the sister organization to OTS, the Association for Tropical Biology and Conservation, which kind of fulfills a very important parallel function to OTS in terms of being a professional society devoted to tropical biology.
Do you want to say anything about ATBC, ATB history, and
well,
or
yeah, the Association for Tropical Biology made a very important decision about 10 years ago, and that was to add C to ATBC, which was, we all clearly knew that human impacts on tropical ecosystems was important and growing. And so we decided that studying pristine habitats as part of ATB, Association for Tropical Biology, could no longer be done without the sea, without conservation. And so we made that decision to begin to embrace environmental conservation and environmental management as well. And then we also made the decision to really go international. And OTS now has moved into South Africa and other places. ATBC was also primarily neotropical in its focus, and we all knew that that had to change. So in the year 2000, we had our first major meeting in the Asian tropics in Bangalore, India, and we've taken the association now around the world to Brazil, Tanzania, we'll be in Australia in a few years. So our idea is really to incorporate tropical biologists wherever they might be.